Hello everyone, Max here with Fiction Rant, bringing you part 4 of my series discussing the Star Wars vs. Battlestar Galactica contest. This part will discuss the defensive capabilities of each faction. As a reminder from part 1, this is a comparison of the Star Wars Imperial Empire, circle the Battle of Endor when it was at the height of its power, versus the 12 colonies of Kobol prior to them getting nuked into oblivion, and in a parallel comparison versus the Cylons, also immediately prior to nuking the 12 colonies of Kobol into oblivion. Once again, I'll start with the Imperials, and I'll start with their fighters, since their defenses are really easy to explain. They don't have any. TIE fighters, bombers, and interceptors are all totally unshielded, though they are somewhat armored, so small arms fire isn't really capable of destroying them. Based on the various shows and movies, it appears that this armor is really only good for avoiding incidental damage and provides little if any protection from directed fire from opponents. Basically, all Imperial fighters and bombers are expected to stay alive by just being really quick and nimble, and just avoiding getting hit in the first place. There are models of TIE fighters, such as the TIE Defender, which are shielded, but they're not part of the standard complement to accompany any Star Destroyers as of the Battle of Endor, so I'm not going to factor them into my comparison. Before I move on to Star Destroyers, I want to touch on the different kinds of shielding available in Star Wars. There's 3 main varieties: particle shields, ray shields, and magnetic shields. Particle shields stop objects, but energy can pass straight through. These are what help ships not get obliterated by interstellar dust as they're flying around. Ray shields stop energy, but not objects, as we saw most clearly at the Battle of Naboo, when battle droids walked straight through the Gungan shields despite their artillery having absolutely no effect. Incidentally, this is the same kind of shielding that also protected the thermal exhaust port on the first Death Star, which is why they had to use torpedoes to nuke the thing. Finally, magnetic shields basically just retain atmosphere and provide little to no actual protection. In general, if you hear about deflector shields being used, that's on larger shields, and it probably refers to a combination of particle shields and ray shields, though not always. They kind of just use all the terms for shielding fairly interchangeably. Capital ships in Star Wars all utilize some combination of these shields. The Imperial II Star Destroyer I'm using for this comparison is no exception. If you check the wiki, you'll see that it's protected by deflector shields. But really what that's saying is that the ships are protected by a combination of particle and ray shields, so they're capable of resisting both projectile and energy attacks. An important exception to this is the hangar bays, which are protected by the geometry of the ships themselves, and magnetic shields only. As demonstrated in the Revenge of the Sith on the CIS ship, there's blast doors that can extend to seal up the hangar in an emergency, but fighters can go straight on through. I have no reason to assume that Star Destroyers wouldn't have blast doors that can seal up a breach as well, but they're not in place all the time so that fighters can get in and out easily. Which is why the geometry of the capital ships are arranged so as to make firing directly into the unshielded bowels of the ship more difficult, such as having the hangars on the sides or on the bottom, not on the front. There is a carrier-style ship in the Imperial Navy that does have the hangar on the front, which seems like a horrible idea to me, but I think it's not really supposed to engage in direct combat anyway. In addition to shielding, all Star Destroyers are also heavily armored and are capable of taking quite a beating when unshielded before being destroyed. Unfortunately, the limits of both shielding and armor in Star Wars is really badly defined in general, so I'll have to try to infer the relative levels of durability rather than leaning on actual demonstrations of resilience. Another element of defense that all Imperial II Star Destroyers employ is point defense weaponry. Different classes of Star Destroyer will have different combinations of point defense weaponry, but in the case of the Imperial II, it seems that they're limited to their 6 dual concussion missile turrets. These missiles are of limited use versus other capital ships, but they're guided, quick, and agile, and can easily take out all but the most lucky or skilled fighters. I'll also note that the Death Star, the first one at any rate, was completely unshielded. There are lines talking about how it has magnetic shielding, but as I've already talked about, magnetic shielding doesn't actually do anything defensively. It just retains atmosphere, so why they would have any on the Death Star in the first place, I don't know. Maybe they wanted it to simulate a moon more approximately, whatever. But in any case, the attack fighters were able to get in nice and close with no issue because it is exclusively armored. There are, of course, areas that are shielded, like the aforementioned thermal exhaust port, and on the second Death Star, they were externally shielded from all attacks, and that shield had to be brought down before the attack could go inside and blow the thing up. But also, presumably, the Emperor's observation platform was also shielded. So the whole thing isn't shielded on either Death Star, but sensitive regions, things like please don't kill the Emperor, that would be shielded, presumably. On to the BSG factions. One major element is that shields don't exist in the Battlestar Galactica universe, so everything is armor, and point defenses. Galactica specifically was so heavily armored it was able to take a direct hit from a nuke, and thanks to the comment section from my last video, I actually have some information on that. So I'll be assuming that the nuke was generating approximately 15 megatons of energy. So again, assuming that Galactica was tanking about half that energy, the rest going harmlessly off into space because that's how geometry works, that means that it was able to survive a single hit with about 30 petajoules of energy. It hurt, don't get me wrong, but the ship survived. I'd assume that for this comparison that the Jupiter-class battlestars are equally as durable. The main defensive capabilities of battlestars are more preventative, however. During battles, they'll use their 514 point defense KEWs, and sometimes even their 24 additional heavy KEWs, to set up a flak screen between themselves and their opponents, which is capable of destroying any fighters or missiles that get too close. This method seems less concerned with actually targeting and intercepting anything, and more interested in just a blanket approach that shreds anything that gets anywhere nearby. The remainder of a battlestar's defenses come from its fighter complement, which is used to intercept and destroy not only enemy fighters, but also any missiles that are on their way, with a high priority placed upon intercepting atomics. On to the fighters. Vipers, just like battlestars, are totally unshielded. They are armored to a degree, but their main survivability is dependent entirely on just not getting hit in the first place. Cylons take a different defensive strategy to the Colonial Fleet forces. They don't have any point defense cannons or artillery on their base stars. Instead, they have a decent amount of armor, which can actually repair itself between battles, and are absolutely bristling with missile launchers. They depend almost entirely on their massive amount of fighters in the form of Cylon Raiders to protect their large ship. Each base star carries 434 Raiders, which can all be launched simultaneously and which will carry out any fighter or munition interception needed, while attempting to land their own missile hits on an important target. If I had to compare base star armor to battlestar armor, I'd say that base stars are much more lightly protected than their colonial counterparts. We get to see a couple base stars get destroyed in the show with big holes getting blown through them by heavy KEW fire, which, when compared to Galactica surviving a direct nuke hit, indicates pretty clearly to me that base stars are relatively squishy targets if you manage to get close enough. Finally, let's touch upon ground force defenses, starting with infantry and starting with stormtroopers. All the soldiers utilize standard stormtrooper armor, which comes in several variants depending on the particular environment in which they're operating. Honestly, this armor is garbage. Aside from being a convenient place to carry gear and integrating communications equipment, the armor appears to provide no protection, and even seems to impede the user's ability to see, as Luke points out in A New Hope.
I can't see a thing in this helmet.
Heck, in Return of the Jedi, in what is now one of my favorite clips from the series, a stormtrooper is felled by a tiny arrow from an Ewok in his back. In any case, I'm quite confident in saying that both Colonial Marine and Cylon Centurion weaponry is quite capable of killing stormtroopers despite their armor. Speaking of Colonial Marines, they wear body armor that is highly reminiscent of modern body armor, with helmets and body plates around vital areas. The armor does seem to provide some protection against small arms fire, but does not have full body coverage, and certainly wouldn't protect against repeated hits. And Stormtrooper blasters would probably do a real number on them. Cylon Centurions are a whole different monster. To put them in Star Wars terms, they're basically super battle droids that have brains. In BSG, they're quite difficult to kill, requiring armor-piercing ammunition to bring down. They're also quite quick on their feet, which combined with their durability and integrated weaponry makes them pretty scary to fight. As for ground-based armored vehicles, the Imperials are really the only faction of the three that uses any, mainly the AT-AT and AT-ST walkers. These are heavily armored and impervious to all but the heaviest of blasters, such as those mounted on ships, but they're also top-heavy and vulnerable to, wood and rope. So make of that what you will. So there you go. My summary of the different defensive capabilities of each faction. How will this factor into the overall matchup? Well, you'll just have to stick around and keep watching to see what I think about that. But in the meantime, please comment if I forgot to mention something or if I'm downplaying something too much. And until next time, live long and prosper, and may the Force be with you.